populations.
True.
We're of course talking about Australia. Before true independence.
Yeah, my prediction is going to see a very similar kind of history as with Canada. As again, Australia is part of that Commonwealth, and the unilateral, if you want to call it things, might get far more focused on their own indigenous peoples. As United States, Canada, Australia, again, all places that had large indigenous nations when colonization happened. The inevitable, I guess, issues that they're going to have. But other than that, you're probably going to see a lot more, multilateral things.
Australian colonies were responsible for their own military defense. Between 1870 and 1901, the British decreed that Australia was to be capable of defending herself, with the British providing support if needed, most notably in the form of the Royal Navy. To fulfill this need for defense, the Australian colonial militias were created out of groups of paid professional soldiers, paid citizen soldiers, and unpaid volunteer militiamen. During this time, the Australian military was still far too small to serve overseas, but many individuals volunteered in British war efforts around the world. Much like Canada, small contingents of Australian soldiers were called upon by the British Empire to aid them in various war efforts. One of those was a conflict in Sudan in 1885, which was ultimately abandoned by the British, who didn't see the military venture as profitable. During the Second Boers War, Australian soldiers served alongside British forces, although the British War Office declined a measure to create a unified Australian military force.
Yeah, the British saw, when you look at their colonial history, especially in the 19th century, you're going to see them end of the 20th century. So actually, in the 19th and 20th centuries, see them be a little more pick and choose in a way about which of their colonial holdings are more important, right? Something like Sudan versus South Africa. South Africa has enormous economic benefit going back to really when Europeans started trading with the Eastern Hemisphere and going around Africa. That's clear back in the 1500s, and then Britain get involved in 1700s. But yeah, you see them more invested in somewhere like that. I'd say that's worth way more fighting than somewhere like Sudan.
Instead, individual Australian dispatches were assigned to support British units, but not allowed to serve together. This was likely to prevent any fostering of thoughts of true independence. When the Boxer Rebellion kicked off in China in 1900, in response to the exploitation of China by colonial powers, the British asked for the aid of the Australian Navy, as Australian ground forces were still tied up in South Africa at the time. In China, a single Australian ship lent its help in efforts to blockade Chinese ports,
right?
While a small naval marine contingent of a few hundred men assisted an 8,000-strong multinational force in the taking of key Chinese forts. With the Chinese rebellion crushed, the Australian forces remained behind in support roles, something they were less than happy about.
That was such a difficult thing for the Chinese Boxers. They were called the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. Great name for a rebellious group there. But they were basically rebelling against the exploitation they thought of their country and their government, and the ineffectiveness they thought of their government as well, against the increasing pressure that was happening with European and just foreign imperialism in general. Can't just say European here because Japan was also involved. And when they were kind of fighting against this foreign influence, again, to how invested these foreign groups were in China, they brought in military force. And so what the Boxers had to do was fight a coalition of nations, of powerful industrial nations. That was one of the biggest things about the Boxer Rebellion that separated this, was a non-industrialized China versus a coalition of foreign industrial nations such as Japan, the United States, Germany, Britain, and all of their resources they brought. And the Boxer Rebellion was put down quite violently there. And you saw conflicts like that. Similar one would be like the Opium War, which is similar in its kind of idea that way. But yeah, these are powerful imperial nations, and when you are, again, if you are militarily stronger, economically stronger, you're going to find yourself on more of these winning sides.
On January 1st, 1901, the Australian colonies joined together into the Commonwealth of Australia, and the nation gained its pseudo-independence. When World War I broke out, Australia immediately declared war on Germany, with Prime Minister Joseph Cook stating, "When the empire is at war, so also is Australia." Soon, 20,000 men were sent to the battlefields of Europe.
What is, and if you're Australian, you can help me with this too, or Canadian in that aspect, what do you feel like that